Okay, this is going to be a multiple attempt at explaining this because I still don't have everything, but I'm getting it slightly. This is a monopole device in which the load becomes one pole and the earth becomes the other pole. For voltage, while the electric keeper becomes the other pole for amperage to supply the load. And because this portion of the device is a monopole, the load is engaged as the other end of another monopole counterpoised to this monopole here, making the two of them a dipole. And that's why the load can regulate the outpouring of energy coming from this monopole, so that the load becomes engaged as its own source. But the how is another matter, and that's what I don't have completely the knowledge of. But this is split up, in which the electric keeper is the amperage aspect of this other pole, because we have to get this balanced, and the earth is the voltage. Now, the AC inverter is a regulator, and it regulates the voltage of this electric keeper. So the only thing that can go and vary is the amperage, and it goes up when more voltage is supplied to it from the earth. Now, this earth connection is pretty intriguing. It's basically a multi-part transformer in which the four rods, first of all, the separation of the iron mass into individual rods is kind of like the way that fellow in Pennsylvania does his cores. He doesn't use a solid iron core in his electromagnets. He uses an iron pipe with a slit down one side, and the slit is to prevent eddy currents from developing in his iron shell, shaped pipe. But the pipe is actually more efficient than a solid rod of iron. And that's probably why Bedini told people when doing the schoolgirl motor to use multiple welding rods, because that effectively did the same thing. It broke up each mass of iron to break up eddy currents to reduce their size. Well, these rods are doing the same thing because it's a total iron mass between the four rods running down the center and the 56 connected on either side are two separate masses, and their difference in mass is going to be significant somehow. But the fact that they're broken up breaks up eddy currents among them, because we basically have three transformer cores, the earth being one, the third, and yet we're passing voltage through them, because it's going to supply voltage for this electric keeper. Now, there are two interactions. One is the interaction between the four rods in the middle and the 56 surrounding it, and the other interaction is the earth interacting with that pair. And the earth is being engaged to boost the pair, but the pair themselves have to create their own voltage difference, and that's why there's a difference in mass between the two sets of rods. It's not unlike the two windings on a transformer, except here the earth between them is acting as a semiconductor or a semi-dielectric, in that when the soil is dry, the soil is acting like the dielectric, separating the two masses, so it's like two different coils of wire, because they are separated. They're not. This is a broken connection right here, and the only connection between them is the earth, which is a semiconductor at this point. So it's like two different coils, the primary and the secondary, on a transformer. Now, I would think that the wire coming from here means that it's a step-up transformer. It's stepping up the voltage. And I did a drawing in which I had the Earth represented as a toroidal shape, and each rod is like 1/2 of a turn. So the 2 rods is like a full turn around that toroid. So these rods also represent turns, in a sense, but more importantly, they break up the masses of iron, the 2 separate masses, to break up eddy currents. Because when you do coil windings, very often you have to match the mass of the copper wire when you're doing a primary versus a secondary, especially on a Tesla coil. And that's what we're doing here. We're matching the masses, which is more significant than number of turns anyway. And that's how we get our step up versus step down and keep them in whole number intervals, because we're dealing with whole units of grounding rods that are all the same size, the same length, the same diameter. I believe, they're 5/8 inch diameter steel rods coated with copper. And just that coating alone makes each one galvanic in terms of a voltage difference between the copper surface and the iron core, which effectively makes the grounding rods a dipole in their own right, and a battery in their own right, which means there's going to be a slight current among them internally, internal to each rod, going out to the soil to complete the circuit. So we've got some amperage going through the soil just from the rods alone. Not quite. No, it's a one-way line. Yeah, that's right. It's a voltage difference, so it's really a dipole. Let's see. Oh, well, each rod is a dipole, which means it has its own individual voltage charge. And we got 56 charges versus the 4. So we are setting up a dipole between the 2 masses, since each individual rod has its own voltage charge, its own dipole charge that it's setting up. Okay. I guess that's how you work with dipoles when you deal with them built up in mass. It's all about references. But you have to start from a basic premise. And so the rods themselves are quite an interesting premise to base this on. In any case, somehow we create a monopole here in order for it to become one end of a dipole to the load. And we could say it's an infinite source of charge, voltage charge on this side, counterposing its opposite at the load, which has a limit. And it just so happens the Earth is greater than the load, so this can easily match that. Now the the neon bulb, being a disruptive discharge, I'm going to have to do a loosey-goose interpretation here, in that it creates, a bleeding to death situation of the Earth. It encourages the Earth to bleed to death, to bleed out all its voltage potential into the circuit based on how much the circuit actually draws. And it's going to draw it up here. Because oddly enough, the load makes a circuit. Even though this is broken, it makes a circuit through the loop. Half of the loop, right through here. But one is an inductive coupling, a loose coupling, and the other is a solid coupling, a direct shunt to the load. Now, this is to regulate the voltage so that it never rises, so that the only thing that can rise is the amperage. And this is to drive the amperage with the voltage down here, because it's a few turns here. But it drives it in an amperage sense, inductively coupled. Yet the amperage is going to go directly through here, from this loop. So it's like a branch circuit, in which we've got a branch here, but we've also got this branch in here. Problem is, it can't come back as a complete loop. It has to go to the earth instead. But it's going to the earth inductively coupled, not amperage coupled. So consequently, the only thing that can pass back to the earth is voltage. Induced by this inductive coupling here. So this is strictly a voltage device component down in here. But, and this is directly shunted to the earth, just as this is directly shunted to the electric keeper. So in a sense, the earth is another electric keeper. How about that? But its connection to this electric keeper is inductive. So this is the main connection in here. So this stuff is circulating. The amperage is circulating in here. Wait a second. Actually, yeah, we can't really say that the amperage goes through here because it can't come out. We'll have to pass on that thought for the moment. Anyway, so we've got this condition here, this neon bulb is creating a bleeding to death situation here. It's like it creates a wound right in here. And the wound makes possible an indeterminate, an unlimited amount of voltage to rise here, to power this, to feed that. Oh, I know. Oh, it's so obvious. The amperage in here is fixed. Well, it could rise due to this inductive coupling here. See, this is the only loop that can provide an amperage to the load. So the amperage will rise based on this inductive coupling due to the voltage rise here being far higher than this one over here. And the AC inverter is a regulator to maintain voltage. It's not meant to regulate anything else. So, it both transfers voltage to here and also accepts transference of amperage to pass out into here. Does that make sense? No, voltage. Remember, this is a monopole. See, the only thing this can do is provide a voltage charge to this, and a surge by comparison to this, which is a lack, or a draw if you prefer. Yeah, a negative draw when you engage the switch and engage both sides here. So this is supplying a voltage inductively, which gets transferred into here and converted into a rise of amperage, which in turn provides the signal of the risen amperage to here. So the amperage here has to match the amperage here, and the voltage here has to match the voltage here. So whatever goes on in this electric keeper has to match what we want to do over here. But in terms of a supply. So this is our supply. I knew it. This electric keeper is the supplier for this. But it's done through voltage transfer, strictly speaking. Because there's no amperage circuit here. This is broken, and this is a semiconductor earth, which is not going to effectively help supply amperage for the power loop here that goes to the load circuit. So this amperage here is inductively coupled to this to power the amperage needs over here. So the voltage coming in here is raw from the earth, and it's regulated by this electric keeper, induced here through the primary and through these two transformers that are counteropposed for maximum efficiency. But that's all the counterposing does. You can still get by on one transformer core powering the electric keeper. It's just more efficient with two of them, the way they're wired. And we don't want the voltage of the electric keeper to rise above what this is set it at, and that's why we have the voltage short over here on this side. And it has to be on the other side of the load, because we don't want it on this side, because it would short out between the two. So it has to be on this side, with the load in between, because the load is providing resistance of two different types, either inductive resistance or non-inductive. But somehow this neon bulb gets this to bleed to death. Basically, it wounds the earth in such a way that the earth can supply all the voltage needed to be converted into amperage. Oh, wait a minute. It's not converted into amperage. Is it? You know, ultimately, it's the voltage that the load is going to drop and drain. Ultimately, it's the voltage that's going to be drained. So, strictly speaking, the amperage within this electric keeper has to match the amperage draw of the load. But it's the voltage that's going to drop and become drained ultimately. And that's what we need in excess of, and that's what the earth supplies. So the AC inverter matches the voltage in here to match the voltage of the load and the sine wave, you know, to be in sync, the 60 cycle sine wave. But the amperage has to rise in here to match the amperage that's rising in here, but it rises because of the voltage rise coming from the earth to be inductively converted into amperage rise in here. So we've got the voltage of this to match the voltage of this, the amperage of this to match the amperage draw of this, and the voltage rise of this to match the amperage demand that now this is placing upon this. It's very intriguing that we have amperage going on here, but it's not tied in directly to the load, and yet it's able to supply the load. because it has its own isolated loop over here. This is the most amazing part of it that intrigues me. Now, because this is an isolated amperage loop, we can infer that the Earth is another isolated amperage loop of its own, transferring voltage to the grounding rods inductively. This is why the Earth is merely a semiconductor. It's also a semi-dielectric, in which it's its own transformer core. Of amperage. Just like this is the electric keeper here, the Earth is another electric keeper over here. Because the Earth is hollow, let's face it. And this is what's overlooked. The hollow Earth is another... It's an electric keeper, but it's also magnetic. It's both. That's the interesting part. Well, just like these cores are electric keepers, but they're magnetizable electric keepers, while this is not. And of course, when you have a magnetizable electric keeper, you get back EMF, and so you get resistance within the Earth electric keeper, just like you do within these transformer cores. But you also get an interaction between the magnetic field and the electric field, which means you can transfer energy inductively, which is what's happening here with this wire going through this loop, the Captor loop. So what's the difference? See, now there's another unanswered mystery. What's the difference between an electric keeper and a magnetizable electric keeper? That's true, because these are electric keepers too, also. But they're magnetizable, and that's the difference. Well, magnetizable in a different sense than the wire is magnetizable. The current, the amperage within the wire. Well, in the case of the wire, only the amperage can rise, while in the case of this magnetizable, the magnetic field can rise. The magnetizable substance can rise in its magnetic potential, in its magnetic charge, which affects its voltage. So here, the only thing that can rise is amperage, because its voltage cannot be affected, because it's just a copper loop. That's the difference. So something that's magnetizable can have its voltage rise, because all of these are electric keepers. But a strict electric keeper, such as this wire, can only have its amperage rise. So the Earth is another magnetizable toroid that can have its voltage rise or fall. And there's something about the neon bulb that disrupts it to engage with the 60-cycle sine wave that is also inductively coming out of this Captor loop and coming to the Earth. This is what was meant by somebody else's analysis, that somehow the Earth is able to tune itself to the circuit. Well, it's able to do so because of the disruption from this neon bulb. It's aggravated to do so, to tune itself to this. It's aggravated. We could say that the disruption of the neon bulb is a voltage dipole of its own. See? Because it's the top end of the secondary of a Tesla coil, and the Earth is the bottom end. So the Earth, let's think about this. The Earth's voltage drops a little because it wants to, it's a transformer, inductive coupling between the Earth and these rods, and so the Earth is getting two signals. It's getting the 60-cycle sine wave from here, but it's also getting the disruptive cacophony coming from the neon bulb up here. All mixed through, coming through this shunt, transferred directly. Oh dear. That means it has a greater impact on the electric keeper than it does on the Earth. weird. You know what I think? I think it's coming through this line here, because it goes directly to here. Which means actually it goes in both directions, because it's going to be inductively transferred to the primary, which means it's going to go back through plug number 2 to the neutral here, which is shared with the neutral here, to plug number 1. So it's going to come out on both ends. It's going to come out here inductively, and it's going to go through the Captor loop and come through the 56 grounding rods inductively. So it's coming from both sides, both the 4 rod side and the 56 rod side. The disruption with the dielectric or the semi-dielectric of the Earth in between. And it never varies its load. Well, no, actually the load goes up and down and the voltage goes up and down. That's what makes it disruptive. That means there's going to be multiple back EMFs happening down in here due to the chaos. I don't know, I can't, it's still vague, it's still obtuse, but I can't help but think that all this does is create a wound that makes it possible for the Earth to interact with the circuit, without which the Earth wouldn't react. It would not interact, it would just sit there. You know what this does? It's kind of like scratching your fingernails against the blackboard. It makes the circuit noticed by the Earth, because the circuit is screaming. This part of the circuit is screaming. It's not a whole lot of potential, because it's not a whole lot of load. I can't help but wonder if the Earth wants to drown out this scream by supplying the only other wave that this circuit will adhere to or resonate with. The only circuit that it will resonate with is 60 cycles, because this scream is so chaotic, any response on the part of the Earth cannot match this, creating an asymmetry between the top load and the Earth. And the only way to make up the difference is to supply a waveform that's in concert with this. That means the Earth is an organic being. That's an intelligent being that can regulate itself to counterpoise what's going on here. And do so multiply. Because if, all the plants on the Earth are individual beings with their own phase to their pulses. And the Earth has to coordinate all these different pulses that are out of phase with each other and make up the difference somehow on a point-by-point basis. Being by being. Think of the people. Maybe the plants are in concert with the Earth as an organic whole, so they're in harmony with the Earth. But human beings have the capacity to do all sorts of things. And it's kind of like the brain versus all the cells of the body. The brain has to respond to all the cells of the body because what's happening to my fingers is not the same as what's happening to my stomach necessarily. It's going to be out of phase, it's going to be a different activity, and yet my brain coordinates everything. So there's some nervous system at the center point, at the gravitational center of the Earth, making the Earth not an entirely hollow sphere. Otherwise, it's hollow. And that coordinating center is the nerve center of the whole Earth, and somehow coordinates all of the various activities of the Earth and integrates its response. So it becomes the whole to integrate all the activities of all the different circuits, because every being is a separate circuit. And although the plants may be in phase with the Earth, the human beings are anything but in phase. They're constantly throwing themselves out of phase by their own independent actions. And that would apply to the animals as well. That's right. More so to the humans, though. So that's, I think, what's going on. This scream here is so chaotic and so random. Well, no, think of lightning strikes. The Earth has to respond to the lightning strikes more than anything. Even more so than this. Even more so than the humans. So if we ever made demands upon the Earth greater than all the lightning strikes combined, or greater than the capacity of the Earth to respond to lightning strikes, let's put it that way, whatever that capacity may be, we'd probably destroy the Earth. It would probably fragment into 1,000 pieces. And that's probably how Maldek was destroyed and created the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Is because the demand, the disruptive demand, became greater than what the core could supply to make up the difference. Because the core is coordinating the power responses of the shell when the shell gets struck by lightning. For the most part, it can take it, but sometimes, or under rare circumstances, it can't, and the whole thing breaks apart. And that's probably how stars explode. They don't explode, they just break apart, because stars are hollow planets with a ionizing ocean, an ionized ocean, a plasma, a photospheric ocean in layers, just like ours has 2 layers of neon and silicon. And when a star explodes, it's probably because the plasma explodes, but the shell underneath breaks apart. Unless it's the core that explodes, I don't know. See, I don't even know what the core is at the gravitational center. But stars are planets. They're just fully functional planets. Our planet is marginally functional. Oh, okay, so the disruptive discharge of the neon bulb. The Earth can't respond to it except with a coordinated pulse of its own. And that might be what the Schumann resonance is the Earth's response to all of that cacophony of lightning strikes that are happening at random with each other, with respect to each other. That's right. So the Earth's response is the Schumann resonance, but, or whatever it happens to be at the moment. People are claiming it's actually rising. And it's probably due to all of our influences interacting with the Earth. Yeah, the Earth's response is a complex which takes into consideration all of the lightning strikes, all of the circuits grounded to the Earth, all of the electric grids, everything, all of the influences. It creates a coordinated, complex response that matches every individual input circuit to supply that individual circuit with its needs. So the circuit is in phase and in cycle to just a portion of that complex response that the Earth is providing. But this is a lightning strike, this neon bulb of its own. It's actually a series of lightning strikes, and it's a complex of its own, which kind of makes this a microcosm, its own little Earth, because we have our own little electric keeper in here. And the Earth is able to accommodate that in its own complex fashion. Accommodate all the different circuits. I think we've created a living being here, a living creature, because I think that's what each creature is in its connection to the Earth, and its load that it draws, and it's got its electric keeper, which is probably some feature of the heart, the circulatory system, because this looks like a circulatory system, doesn't it? I mean, the blood never goes inside the cells. This could be like cellular tissue. While this is the bloodstream, it's all done by capillary transfer, which is what's happening here inductively. It's also breathing. Or no, actually, no, the heartbeat is this thing over here. This is the heart over here. And this is the artery, and this is the artery over here. I don't know what the vein constitutes, but let's I'll forgo that. Yeah. Well, actually, this is a capillary link right in here. Single hemoglobin flow. While these inductive couplings have to do with the surface of the artery, all of that surface is molecular transfer of chemistry into the cell, while in this case it's an electrical transfer, because molecular transfer acts as an electron carrier. So these inductive couplings, like this Captor loop here that's supplying the load to here, that's a cross-transference across the capillary wall to supply nutrients to here, because the nutrient is electric charge. So this is very much like a physiology in its construction. I think I'm going to have to just stop at this point. I've gone as far as I can. It's still vague, but it takes practice, I got to keep working at this. Every time I try, it gets a little bit better than before. It looks pretty good. I don't know. It's getting a little better.